Class, MASH. By Anutty. Chapter 221, Final Stages. Elder Sargis P.O.V. Elder Sergi stared at the young man, his group surrounded him. He was hung up on the last thing the boy, Mash the Lost, had said. Mash promised a solution, to act as a savior for the people of his world. The elder might have agreed if not for the boy's own admittance of his faults. It sounded like the boy had his own set of problems, and the elder couldn't make a decision of such significance himself. He would need to speak with the other elders and the leaders of the Kishiv. He assumed the other elders would be willing, but the Kishiv would be harder to convince. Especially once they learned of the boy's involvement in the present situation. He couldn't help but let another exaggerated sigh as the child and his friends marched away. They were strange people who seemed to lack any natural defenses. He knew that was false as he could observe their power to a degree. The energy that pulsated from them gave off greater readings than any storm could. They were monsters who were powerful beyond anything the elder had imagined. How had they acquired so much strength so fast? It was a deceptive power too. Their strange soft clothing and fleshy-looking skin made them seem so vulnerable. Even the Kishiv possessed thicker skin than the humans. That was how they had referred to their race. It was a strange word, which they claimed was only used to define their bodies. It had no greater meaning beyond that, and yet they seemed proud of the fact. He used his hands to brush away some of the dirt that had built on his hands. His own skin was hard, and normally it would be a radiant and unblemished white. However, spending days in the woods had left his skin caked with small patches of dirt and grime. He desperately wanted to clean himself. He lingered a little longer though. After the group had finally left his sight, the elder turned to face the city. He was very familiar with his back and wanted to return as urgently as possible. There was too much he would need to do and say, and wasting time checking on the group would be a mistake. Trust facilitated the passage of the future, and he would give the children the opportunity to meet his expectations. They were only children, and he hoped that would make it harder for them to lie. They were on their way to speak with a man named Gerald the Forgetful. The name was something he had heard before, and one that seemed inappropriate. Gerald had been the only man to match the elder's age, and his mind seemed undaunted by the years. Jill the Leaper had been the one to share the man's name. The names were truly similar, and he shivered from the thought. The worlds were similar. His own people had a similar naming style for children. It was why they had given Mash and his friends titles. Mash was the lost as he was always missing from the world. Jill was the leaper as she jumped across worlds. Luke had become the mender, and Red was simply known as the Red. It was a rather rude name, and he refused to say such a thing about another, regardless of the strange color of her hair. The elder let out another sigh, lamenting the youth of his compatriots. It was only a 200-year difference, yet the other elders were so childish. Hopefully, the humans could form peace, but he imagined he would need to construct his argument well. The others would not be willing to abandon this world, but he felt the opposite. Despite the resources that Gerald claimed existed in this world, the elder knew the opposite to be true. There had been a rather long dry season, and the farms were failing one after another. Soon they would not be able to feed the Kishiv, let alone survive through this war. Their world had been overused, and the goddess had abandoned it in the exchange for information. Sergi wished there were more options but couldn't see any other solutions. The man didn't seem like the type prone to anger, but he could not really tell with their strangely leathery skin. The city came into sight, and he knew that he would have his hands full. Signs of fires could be seen in the outer city. Many Kishiv cities had been badly burned by a stray attack. The building was broken, many breaks were outlined by black singes. The smoke even rose from the occasional home, but he was glad to see that there were no children around. It seemed like that aspect of their evacuation had worked. Most children would be behind the walls now. The elder grabbed a small metal device from his pocket. It was rectangular in shape and had hundreds of squarish buttons on it. They covered both the front and back of the object. It was a long-distance communicator. Each button represented a symbol from which he could construct words. The other elders would receive the message. He kept the message short, his fingers tapping away on the buttons. He held the device side so that he could hit buttons on either side without much effort. After about a minute the message was sent, and he couldn't help but wonder how their lives would change. Mash P.O.V. Mash walked back through the portal, and he turned to the others. What now? The four of them exchanged quick glances at one another. Mash felt a little awkward about offering to ferry a group of people to another world, but the others didn't seem to have any problems with the suggestion. He knew that he had made a big decision without consulting the others, but he just wanted to let the elder prepare as much as he could. It is fine, I sent the others your idea before you spoke. Priscilla's message made Mash stumble a little. At some point, he had given Priscilla express permission to reveal some of his ideas if he didn't think of it. He left it to her discretion to decide which ones. He trusted her judgment, maybe even more than his own at the moment. It was a relief to hear that they had shared his idea beforehand, as that meant that they would have stopped him if they didn't agree. So, it most likely wasn't a terrible decision. Red spoke, and he was somewhat expecting her to chastise him for making a hasty decision. We should probably find Gerald and ask about the situation. Try to stop the war before we go and steal a world's people. Mash nodded. It was a meeting that he was eager to have as well. Gerald had seemed like a good person, and Mash wanted to give the man the benefit of the doubt, but it sounded like he was also involved in the senseless slaughter. Do you think he is involved? Mash checked with the others first, curious to see if they had reached the same assumptions as him. Red was usually the most skeptical, but it was Luke who spoke up. He nodded slowly, as he explained. I noticed steady progress in his strength. I think he is killing in the other worlds too. His tone had become oddly separated from his normal speech. It was like he was talking through himself, but at the same time, it was indirect. Mash couldn't quite describe it. Jill started speaking as Luke finished. Her words were edged with bitterness. So much for virtuous, hey. The edge to her words made it sound like she wanted to do more than just talk to the man. It seemed like she was jumping to the extreme, but he could understand her perspective. Gerald acted like a good person, and this felt a little like a betrayal. They continued to talk for a little while about how to address the situation, and Red pulled out a small glass orb. It blinked with a red light. Mash stared in confusion as she had drawn it in the middle of their conversation. Also, it was just something he didn't recognize. Gerald is at the sect. The blinking means that he wants to speak. He probably heard that we entered the other world. Let's see if we can't get some answers. We should prepare a strategy, it will probably get violent. Red seemed to have picked up some of Jill's coldness. Her words made it seem like she was hoping for a fight. Mash felt strange as he was the only one that didn't feel any real danger yet. He wanted to hear Gerald's side before making any decisions, although he didn't know what had happened over the past 2 days. They had given him a basic rundown of events, and he knew that they had met with Gerald on several occasions. It seemed like they had soured on the man. He would get his chance soon enough. They flew at a mostly steady pace and made it to the sect in an hour or so. The sky was cloudy and blocked the sunlight from falling on them. They had come up with some basic strategies in case a fight broke out. It wasn't overly complex. Even if Gerald had been taking advantage of the other world, they didn't want to just kill people either. It wouldn't feel good to just massacre one person to save another. They should be able to escape without much serious worry too. It wasn't a complex plan, which was usually the ideal situation. They didn't bother checking the sect much, as Mash had been told that it was mostly empty now. Almost everyone was trying to get stronger. They continued up the side of the mountain, knowing that Gerald would likely be sitting atop his tower. As Mash saw the familiar tower, he couldn't help but feel like it was more ominous now. He decided to never live in or build a tower. It just seemed like a poor design choice. Cresting the top of the tower, he landed in front of a seated Gerald. His wings quickly retreated into his body. The others landed with him and they sort of stood across from Gerald. The position of the 4 of them standing opposite the seated master stressed their division. A cloud broke in the sky and a ray of sunlight fell onto Gerald, and Mash could understand why the others had soured. Gerald was a lot stronger, notably so. With his domain, he estimated the man to be around twice as strong as he was before. The light seemed to fall on the man intentionally, and Mash inwardly cursed toward the sky for its favoritism. You're a lot stronger. It was Mash's job to evaluate his strength, and he was supposed to send a message to others about it. He gave them more details, telling them he was at least twice as strong as before. He probably shouldn't have spoken aloud, but he wanted to address the change immediately. Gerald smiled broadly as he spoke. Yes. The other world is filled with great resources. You cannot imagine how much I have progressed. I am nearing my next advancement too. The upgrade will be immense. I will finally reach the immortal realm. The way Gerald spoke of it, told Mash that he probably would agree to a peaceful solution. The fervor in Gerald's voice told Mash that he wanted nothing more than to achieve the next realm. Mash hesitated in his response. He didn't know what to say, or even if he should say anything. He sent a message to the others, letting them know that they should take charge. Mash imagined that if he shared any of his words it would lead to disaster. What he hadn't expected was Luke to speak with even harsher words than Mash would have chosen. Chapter 222, Gerald the Greedy. It sounds like you plan on continuing, and you think that's fine. How many have you killed personally? There was an accusation in Luke's words. His anger was understandable, especially considering the condition of the Kishiv. The way they were being treated wasn't fair, and he obviously didn't like the joyful expression on Gerald's face. The master shook his side to side. The motion was slow and didn't interrupt his speech in any way. You do not understand. This may be my only opportunity to reach the immortal realm. Despite how I may look, I am old. Almost to the point where advancing my realm will become impossible. I had given up on the idea before, but these people offer so much ki. Their bodies are practically made of the highest quality material. Red's words cut off Gerald, and she didn't hesitate in joining Luke's tone. What if I could offer you a peaceful surrender? The elders said they would agree to one. That was not the truth, but Mash kept his mouth shut regardless. She was obviously trying to bait a response from the man. The way she spoke was meant to provoke him. Gerald didn't fall for it though, and he spoke calmly. We would accept. However, I would still need some Kishiv at the very least. I would assume the same to be true of some other masters as well. If you see no. Regardless of how they look, they are people. You are not going to sacrifice them like cattle. Luke was furious now, and he had taken a step toward Gerald. The man still looked calm, certain in his position and belief. Mash was sure that if Luke really tried to hit him, Gerald wouldn't be able to block it. The punch was never thrown though, and Gerald looked a little annoyed now. It was the first time Mash saw any signs of displeasure in the man. This was a man who was supposed to be virtuous. That was almost laughable now. After getting a glimpse of power he had become consumed with greed. Or maybe he truly believed that it would be more righteous to ascend to the next realm than save lives. He probably believed that he could do better or something idiotic like that. Mash now understood why the others had such sour expressions. His own face had scrunched up a little. Utter disgust was all Mash could feel now. He felt like he couldn't even look at the man who Mash had thought of as nice. As it turned out, he should have trusted his first assumption and never trusted someone who would refer to themselves as a master. Turning away in disgust, he started moving away, heading toward the lip of the tower so that he could leap off. This conversation was getting nowhere, and he wanted to try and help the other side as quickly as possible. Mash doubted that many in his world would have disagreed with Gerald's desires, but his methods were extreme. He had done something similar once before, and he had considered it to be one of the worst things he had ever done. Gerald was practically seeking out that situation. Standing at the ledge, Mash heard Gerald speak from behind him. His domain revealed that Gerald had risen to his feet and he spoke with a harsher tone. What are you planning? I know you for the liar you are. Do not act like you would not do the same as I. Mash scoffed at his words and prepared to leap from the tower when he remembered why he wanted to speak with Gerald in the first place. It had been something he had been planning even prior to meeting with the elder. Mash swallowed his pride but couldn't say the same for his anger. Still, he persisted and turned slightly before speaking. I apologize for everything that has happened. I will try and fix it. After saying his piece through gritted teeth, he jumped off the tower. He didn't want to speak with Gerald any longer, and the man barely deserved the apology. Mash should have just ignored the man entirely and just apologized to Daniel, but that would be similarly vain. He couldn't just apologize to the people that he liked. No, it was important that he spoke to those that had been involved. At the very least, he needed to tell someone. Although he would apologize double for the people that were actually good. Mash still believed that Daniel would be doing the right thing. Mash wanted to see if Daniel was in the tower, but decided to wait for another time. It was more important that he went and met with the elders again. To hear what they planned to do with his offer. Even if they rejected it, Mash figured they could at least try to smash the portals. He hoped that they could manage that. Maybe Jill's new explosion thing could break them. It would certainly make for a big discovery if she could destroy a portal. He wondered how that would affect his own world. There must be plenty of people who would benefit from a dungeon being closed. The idea had crossed his mind but he didn't want to suggest it. It felt like something that could cause problems with powerful people. As he fell down the tower, a pair of wings sprouted from his back, and he caught up with his friends who were already ahead of him. He had been lost in his thoughts for a second and fell behind as the three of them started heading back to the portal. He quickly caught up with them. He could easily outpace them if he tried, but that would be pointless. They talked casually as they flew, and that basically just meant they vented their frustrations. None of them had liked what Gerald had said because in many ways it was a reflection of their own world. Even they would have made the same decisions if not for the strange turn their lives had taken. It was almost as if they had seen an alternative version of themselves. Mash mostly just nodded along to what the others had said, as he didn't know if he could be as hostile as them. It wasn't that he sympathized or agreed with Gerald, but he could understand his decisions. That wouldn't change anything he was planning though. Just because he could understand why Gerald was doing what he was, didn't mean that Mash wouldn't try his hardest to end it. Gerald, for all of his cruelty, was a very normal person. He was a greedy, selfish man, but that wasn't really surprising. There would always be people like that. The rest of the trip wasn't particularly eventful, although Red did notice that the glass orb was blinking again. It seemed like Gerald was asking for them, but they decided to ignore it for now. None of them were in the mood to speak with the man again, and Mash wasn't about to do anything on his own. At least not if he didn't need to. Although with Priscilla around he guessed that he never really did anything truly alone. They spotted the portal on the ground and noticed that there were some people standing outside of it. One of which was Daniel. Mash could see the man fiddling with something in his hand, and could guess what was happening. Gerald almost certainly had a way to communicate over large distances. Even if all they had were these orbs, it would still be enough to communicate. They descended quickly and Mash could see many of the people grow tense. Whatever Gerald had told them had not been to ease the situation. He was probably scared that Mash would do something to stop him from gaining more power. Mash smiled as he knew that Gerald could do nothing to stop him. "Tell the others that I'm gonna talk to Daniel first." Mash sent the message to Priscilla. The smile vanished from his lips as he landed before Daniel. The others landed by the portal. Daniel was dressed in slightly different clothes now. He still wore what looked like a mix between armor and a traditional robe, but now they had a bluish hue to them. Mash could tell that he was a little stronger, but the change was nowhere near as significant as with Gerald. Mash met Daniel's eyes and was given the same respect in return. Mash didn't know what else to say and just started speaking. Both for what he had done and what he was just about to do. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake and caused all of this shit. I'm sorry, but I am going to end this war and save who I can. I won't let your people continue to slaughter theirs. I'm the reason your people died." Mash turned to the portal, letting Daniel know what he was talking about. Mash spoke his mind without letting Daniel respond or explain himself in any way. His impression of Gerald had grown bad after seeing his greed, and he didn't want Daniel to reveal that he had become the same. When Daniel said nothing and just stared at the portal blankly, Mash continued. "I don't think there is any way for me to really apologize. So, I'm sorry. If you need something from or want to punish me, I will accept it." That part was the easier thing to say. He had calmed down more upon speaking with Daniel, and he really did want to apologize to someone Mash considered to be a friend. Daniel continued to say nothing. The silence stretched for almost a minute. Mash started to think that Daniel wouldn't say anything and started to walk towards the portal. The others were waiting for him. As he started, Daniel finally spoke. "Why does Gerald want me to stop you?" Daniel's words got Mash to pause. Slowly, Mash turned around to face Daniel again. He wasn't great at forcing his thought into someone else's mind. Usually, they had to be receptive to it if he wanted Priscilla to send things. Although he was a lot stronger than Daniel now, he was able to do what he wanted. "Priscilla, send him my memories with Gerald." She knew that he only meant the most recent ones. Mash felt as if Priscilla sent the message, and could see how Daniel's face changed slightly. It didn't grow hostile, but Mash saw him start to cry. Daniel didn't even seem to know what was happening, and Mash didn't step further away from the man. Instead, he took a step closer and rested his hand on Daniel's shoulder. He squeezed it a little. It was a gesture he had received a long time ago but hoped that it would provide some comfort. "Can you save them?" Daniel's words caught Mash off guard a little. The first thing he was concerned with was the safety of the others. His domain let him feel the genuine concern that Daniel had, but he could also see the betrayal. "Yes. I plan on taking them to a safer place." Mash didn't explain the exact details but knew that Daniel had heard of his portal ability. He had used it enough the past 2 days that anyone could have learned of it. Mash didn't want to mention Gerald or anything that he had said. All he wanted to do was reassure Daniel that he would try and stop the war. Daniel nodded, using the sleeve of his right robe to wipe away the tears. Good. I will talk to Gerald. And I want you to know that I haven't killed anyone on the other side. Nothing else was said between the two, but they exchanged a single glance before parting ways. Daniel raised one of his hands and stopped the other members of his sect from doing anything. The signal was given and the group dispersed, leaving Mash and his friends alone. They stood in front of the portal and braced themselves for the worst. There was a good chance that the Kishiv wouldn't hesitate. The elder hadn't trusted Mash and left a trap for him. While they were unlikely to suffer any serious harm, he felt his heartbeat quicken slightly. The fear of betrayal boiled inside of him. Chapter 223, Worlds Away. Mash was walking through his world, two elders were following close beside him. It was a bit awkward for him. He was supposed to act as a tour guide and show them a place they might be safe. It wasn't really fair to them, but it was the only solution he had come up with that would avoid all-out war. The others had suggested taking them to another world and his personal one. Although, they quickly realized why that would be a terrible idea. The Kishiv and even the elders looked like monsters. He didn't think that any adventurer or knight would treat them as anything else. The two elders were Elder Sirji and Avji, as they both had spoken with Mash prior. It was a ploy for trust, but Mash didn't really care. He knew that they wouldn't be able to harm him, and his world didn't have anything valuable as far as he was aware. They walked around the planet, not really in hopes of seeing everything but just in an attempt to show the elders what Mash's offer really entailed. He wasn't offering them a furnished world. There would be no cities or maps, and they would pretty much have to do everything on their own. Mash would help when he could since he felt responsible for their situation, but he wouldn't be there all the time. He could help with constructing wooden buildings easily enough, almost everything else would have to come from them. Mash didn't even know what someone would need to establish a small village. His objective here would be to foster an entire world's worth of people. That would be a much bigger venture than he could accomplish. Plus, there was the issue of him receiving dozens of questions from the elders that he couldn't answer. They asked him about the seasons and changes in climate, but Mash hadn't seen any changes yet. Although that didn't mean they didn't happen, just that he hadn't been around for them. The questioning did let him learn a lot from the elders too. Mash learned that the elders' world was called Stavon and that it was small. Also, Daniel's world was called Siraz, which was a similar size. They claimed to be able to estimate the size of his world by the amount of land they had explored, and Elder AVG was fairly confident that his world was 2 or 3 times as large as theirs was. Honestly, they sounded somewhat hopeful, and Elder Sirji was obviously excited, or maybe, he was just intrigued by the opportunity. He claimed that the energy here was denser than their own world too, and they would be able to make even better things here. Mash was a bit interested to see what they would develop and had asked them about it. Their answers to those questions were vague and he didn't really understand much of them. It felt like they weren't very good at teaching. When they spoke, they glossed over the foundation, leaving Mash unable to comprehend any of it. One problem came up a lot as they explored. His world didn't seem to have any animals or monsters. No plantations or farms were set up, so the people would really have to do everything from scratch. The elders had asked about his portal when he had made it, and he implied that he could make it bigger if needed. The plan that had been crafted was a large-scale move. They had a few mobile buildings as well as plenty of farm animals that they wanted to bring with them. He also expected that they would be bringing as much food as possible and whatever farming equipment they had. They had found a source of food in a strange green fruit that grew on the trees. They were hard and sweet, reminding him of an apple. It wasn't quite the same as they had a large central seed in the middle. He didn't think it was very nutritious, but it was tasty. They had been exploring the land for several hours. Only Red had joined him with the two elders. Jill and Luke decided to help in the other world and focused on preventing any of Daniel's people from slaughtering the Kishiv. Then they would lead or teleport as many people as they could. The plan they had come up with was fairly simple. Jill would go from city to city so that she could teleport Mash to them later. Luke was just tagging along as security. It would take them a while even with Jill's speed. The plan meant that they would need to go to every major city, and also alert any travelers or villages that they saw as well. He felt bad pushing something that exhausting onto them but was glad for the opportunity to take it easy. Although it seemed like that would change. They had just arrived at the large tree that seemed to grow even beyond the clouds. The tree had been further away than Mash realized, and it was wider than he expected to. It was even thicker than a mountain, its base could easily house several cities. The more impressive aspect of the tree was its hardness. Mash had tried breaking it with raw strength and it hadn't even chipped. "What are you doing?" The elders were standing beside the tree, and he noticed one of them draw a small metal tube. Mash could see the whole object with his domain and wondered what it was. There was a glass pane on one end. He aimed it at the tree and a small red light shot out and struck the bark. Mash walked over, curious about what they were doing. The elder started speaking as he turned something on a dial on the back end of the tube. Mash didn't notice anything happening with the tree, but Elder Sergi started explaining. "This is a heat beam. I am simply testing the likelihood of the tree catching fire. This device can get hotter than even lightning." Mash stopped his hand in the air. He had been about to move it through the red beam of light but decided he didn't really want to get burned. More importantly, the tree didn't burn at all. Even with the dial turned all the way, it didn't even start to smoke. The elder looked impressed and asked Mash a question. "If we find out a way to cut the tree, may we use the wood for our experiments?" Mash almost said yes but decided against it. He felt like the world was somehow connected to the tree. It was just a guess, but the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. "No, I think the tree is linked to the world. I would protect it if possible. Maybe make it and its surroundings sacred or something." The elders didn't protest and just nodded to Mash's prompting. They seemed to accept his words for the moment. Plus, breaking the tree didn't seem like an easy task, nor was it something they could focus on right now. Their concern would be re-establishing enough cities to house a world's people. The task was daunting, and he couldn't imagine where to even start. The elders seemed more satisfied with the situation, as both were wearing smiles while whispering to one another. Elder Avg turned to Mash, startling him slightly with the suddenness of her motion. He had learned that Elder Avg was considered a lady, although he still didn't understand where the distinctions came from. It seemed somewhat arbitrary. "Do you know what lies atop?" Her gaze drifted back to the tree, and Mash froze. He actually hadn't seen what was above. It was certainly something he had wanted to do, but everything that had happened halted his childish desires. Now it seemed like his duty and desire aligned. "I'll go check." Mash was a little too excited in his response, and his cat-form's wings sprouted from his back. He could have used his wyvern wings, but they used a lot more energy than these did. He could fly for days with these, and he started scaling the tree without waiting for a response. Red didn't let him escape on his own and caught up quickly. "I'm not staying behind with them. They're kind of annoying." Red's words would be unheard by the elders, and Mash nodded in agreement. The elders were a curious people and had been very interested in Red's body. It wasn't in a creepy sense. Well, it was, but not in the way someone would expect. They had somehow figured out the strange situation of her body and had been trying to figure out what she had done. Apparently, the elders had turned their bodies into the form they currently had. It was something that happened over decades. They had somehow changed their bodies through their generations, and their ideal was something like Red. Mash wondered what they would think if they found out she was technically undead. "Yeah, but I think I would use weird instead." Mash replied but added something a second later too. "Although, we're pretty weird too." That was the truth for sure. Mash didn't doubt that he would be considered weird now. The bird-like wings that were fused with his back was proof of that. The fact that he was no longer human also added to the fact. Besides that, he was currently flying along with his teammate who was mostly made of blood and undead. Yeah, weird was probably an insufficient word to use for them. The tree was next to them, and they were flying quickly, but it still felt like it would take a while to get to the top. Already the elders had blended in with the grass below. They were barely specks to them at this point. The tree actually looked bigger now that they were ascending along the side. The clouds were quickly approaching too, and they crashed into them. The clouds were thicker than he expected, and Mash was surprised when they turned to water as he flew through them. It wasn't a gentle condensation either. It began to feel like he was swimming through a cloud, and he saw that the water poured down in large splashes around him. His eyes weren't much help within the cloud, but he didn't really need his eyes to fly upward. After clearing the clouds, he paused and waited for Red. She had slowed when she entered the clouds. She had probably been stunned by the sudden appearance of a river. At least that was what it felt like. "That was cold." Red spoke as she breached the cloud and saw him. Mash nodded. He noticed that it was cold, but it hadn't bothered him too much. His body was resistant to temperature. Though he was bothered by something else. Red's clothes were wet and stuck to her body, and Mash snapped his head downward. His own clothes were in a similar state, and he spun quickly to get rid of most of the water. Afterward, he increased his body temperature to help him dry more quickly. In his domain, he saw Red's clothes ripple before all of the excess water fell away. Within a few seconds, she was dry, but he still avoided looking at her for the moment. He started flying again. Yeah, it tends to get colder the higher up you go, I noticed that before. His words came out slowly, and he didn't get a response for a while. After a few seconds, Red spoke. I see the top. He had been looking in front of him, but his focus had been elsewhere. Now that he was looking, he noticed that they were nearing the treetop. The seemingly endless trunk broke into a countless number of thick branches. Leaves sprouted from them and covered the sky. They were even bigger than the trees in Eifel's world, and the leaves practically seemed like they were made of stone. Mash sped up a little, his excitement letting him forget about any discomfort. He was curious to explore the treetop. Chapter 224, World Tree or Gibril. Mash arrived at the ceiling of his world and was amazed to see that it was made of leaves. Each leaf was easily twice as big as he was and was painted a dark shade of green. As if to match the dark almost black wood of the tree, the leaves were a shade darker than one would expect. They were bunched so closely together that they almost looked like scales. Red was beside him and reached one of her hands toward the leaves. She probably meant to push them, but it barely budged from her light push. These are hard. It's like stone or maybe closer to your scales. Hearing her words, Mash brushed his own hands against the leaves. They had a slight bend to them that stone wouldn't have. She was right, they were a lot more like his scales. He wondered what that said about the tree itself. The world was his, but was it made for him, or did his skill choose one that was appropriate? Both situations had their troubling implications. If the world was made for him, where was it? If it was a pre-existing world, then what happened to life on it? Well, life other than the plants. Red, do you think my skill made the world for me? And can you not cut my tree? Red turned away from the leaves, and Mash saw that one of her floating blades was dangerously close to the leaf. It seemed like she had planned to cut her way through. He didn't know exactly why, but he still felt like it was a bad idea. It felt like he strangely knew what the tree wanted. What a weird situation. If you're asking if your skill killed everyone in this world, I doubt it. There has never been a case where gaining a class or skill killed someone. For all of the firsts you're managing, I don't think this is one of those situations. But why don't you want me to cut the leaves? Mash sighed after hearing her words, and he debated whether or not he should explain. The situation would only make him seem insane, but he decided that was the point of asking them to watch out for him. I can understand the tree. His world dragged on as he felt some heat rise to his face. With all of his body's improvements, was blushing something that needed to stick around. Red wasn't looking at him though, instead, she had turned to face the tree in response. One of her hands pressed against the black wood. The fact that she hadn't dismissed him was a pretty good sign. He slowly drifted closer and heard her apologizing to the tree. She had whispered the words, and he only heard the final words. Please, forgive me. Her words bothered him a little, and he couldn't contain his surprise. Wait, what are you doing? Red turned to him. Something about her had changed a little, but he didn't quite understand the difference. It was like she looked more elvish somehow. Normally, there was no way to know that she was a half-elf, since she lacked the signature ears of the race, and while she was beautiful, it wasn't anything unnatural like the elves. However, the look she gave him seemed to change her entire face. Her eyes narrowed as she seemed to look past him. It had only been there for a moment, but he had been locked by the changes. Her face had grown sharper, all of its features becoming more perfect. He shook his head to dispel the image. The next time he looked, she was back to her old self. It was like it had just been his imagination. Certain trees will have spirits within them. It will affect what grows from them. To elves, those beings are gods, or at least their children. I have been given many lessons about them. I wouldn't be surprised if a tree like this had one of those spirits. And you might be connected to it, considering what your situation is. She believed what she was saying, that much was obvious by the look she gave the enormous tree. However, the question bothered Mash a little. Wait, why haven't I ever heard of it? I've read some books on the other races. Red smiled at Mash's response, and he felt like he had been baited. I bet you only read about classes and skills. Tell me, did you actually learn anything else about them? I don't really see you as someone who would read of another's culture. Her tone made him feel like a child. Yup, he had been baited. The way she said it, painted him to be kind of stupid. He couldn't really disagree with her either. As a kid, all he did was read about the classes and skills that were exclusive to the various races. Elves were the only race that could get true spirit classes. It was said that many elves didn't die but took a class that turned them into a spirit. Mash had never understood what it meant by spirit exactly, but now he had an idea for it. Beastmen obviously had classes directly related to the soul. There was only one other race on his home continent. Dwarves were all reclusive though, and little was known about them. All he had read about their classes was speculation. It was a commonly held belief that they had access to some special blacksmith class. In fact, all of the legendary weapons were said to have been forged by the dwarves. Mash would believe it when he saw it, which was something he hoped to do eventually. Let's just fly around. Mash was about to start, but Red stopped him with a hand. She looked at him incredulously, and he turned back innocently. Just look. That would take a while. Let's just push through the leaves. You should be strong enough, and I can squeeze through the gaps. He acknowledged her words and nodded as he didn't feel any protests from the tree. It seemed like it was okay with them forcing their way through so long as they didn't actually damage anything. Mash moved both hands to the edges of one of the leaves. Only to stop when he felt that there was a small opening within his domain. It was a bit to the right, but close enough that he drifted toward it. It was a tree, and the leaves didn't coat every inch of the branches. The branches were thicker than houses and longer than mountains were tall, but the leaves did a good job at hiding them. The tree really did have an abundance of leaves. Finding the gap was lucky, and when he investigated it, he saw several more. It seemed like the tree had plenty of empty space within its brush, he just hadn't been able to see it easily. There was a path here, though it looked like he would still need to push past some leaves. Mash started floating up into the leaves slowly, but Red blurred past her whole body, dissolving into a thin stream of blood. Whereas he needed to slow down and push through leaves, she was able to move unbothered. She quickly left the range of his domain, and he sped up to try and catch up with her. The leaves were hard to push against without any transformations, but he felt like any of his forms would be overkill. So, he settled into the labor and worked to push past the leaves. They did bend like normal leaves once he started getting them to open. It made his trip like a workout, although he wasn't about to start sweating from the exertion. As Red got further away, he focused on his own journey. The tree bent and twisted a lot, the opening seemed to make a path designed to confuse him. Seeing that the leaves worked like normal, he wondered if the branches would be able to bend in the same way. They were too large for him to test the theory, and he couldn't really picture such a large thing bending. He stopped caring about the effort once he saw a larger opening in his domain. It was probably the exit, and he started working faster. As he neared the opening, he realized that he didn't sense Red anywhere. It wasn't unexpected considering how much he had moved around. As soon as he reached the final leaf, he practically shoved it out of the way as he leaped onto the treetop. He didn't bother flying anymore, as the leaves would certainly be able to handle his weight. The sky was wide, and the sun bore on him unblocked by the clouds. It didn't make the air hot though, and he knew that it was cold enough to be dangerous to normal people. He noticed Red in the distance. She had stopped atop one of the leaves too. Her head was turned back. She was staring up into the air, and Mash turned to look upwards too. His mouth fell open as he realized what she saw. This tree wasn't really a tree at all. Above him, he saw a flower. It was enormous, as if it was attempting to swallow the very sun. He realized then that it did resemble a sunflower, but it had some differences. Instead of many leaves, it only had 5 extremely large ones. The leaves themselves were long and narrow, and he could vaguely make out a bulge at the center, which he could recognize as the tree's tip. It was more curved than he expected, and it resembled the seed core of a sunflower. His mind couldn't settle the two conflicting images. What kind of tree was this? Or was it a flower? It looked like it could be either, at this point. Red looked like she was entranced by the flower, and she barely moved. He wasn't much better and had stared for several minutes. However, he wanted a better look and took to the skies again. He moved toward the center and made sure to pass over Red. She could join him if she wanted, but she seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the sight. As he approached the center, he took note of how delicate the yellow leaves were. They appeared delicate as the wind was enough to make them shift slightly. He stared down at the tree, and a name popped into his mind. He didn't know if he had the right to name it, but the image was perfect. The flower looked to have sprouted from the bed of leaves. It seemed more like a flower that had grown on top of a bush than a tree. However, the way the branch seemed to have replaced the center of the flower, he couldn't help but call it Irjibril. Irjibril was a lie. It was a story told to children, to give hope to those unable to change themselves. It was something that kids would hear when they got a class they didn't want. Or a supposedly cowardly class. His mother had told him the story once, and he remembered spending several nights staring into the sky. The story told of a flower bud that bloomed into a beautiful yellow flower. It had so many petals that none could see what was within. The strange flower had no seeds, so none had been able to plant another. However, the flower was not a simple plant, and it would never produce another seed. In fact, it was a seed itself. It had grown even after blooming, and before long had grown too large for the world. As it grew, it went beyond their world and drifted into the void above them. It grew ever larger as it drifted into the void, and eventually, it changed. It bloomed again, turning into a star that would serve as a guide for the people of the world. The star rarely appeared in the sky, but when it did, a child would be able to make a wish. The flower would grant the wish, as it remembered when the hands which had first planted it. The young child who had taken a chance with a mysterious seed. Chapter 225, Tree Spirit. Mash descended onto the top of the tree. It wasn't actually the highest point, as some of the flower petals bent in such a way that they reached a little higher. However, the top of the tree was rounded and solid, making it a much more comfortable place to sit. The air was cold, and he was able to feel the full brunt of it. His body wasn't actually at risk though. Red was probably in a similar situation. Even though her body appeared to be bothered by the temperature, she was probably not in any real danger. His feet struck the hardwood first, and he was surprised to realize that it was swaying a little. The motion was small enough that he hadn't noticed from above. Now, that he was standing on it, he felt the small change now. He didn't worry about it and just absorbed his wings. As they shrunk, he fell backward into a seated position. His legs were splayed out in front of him, and he used his hands to prop himself up. His back was slanted so that he could stare into the sky. The sun was off to his left, and the sky was blue and unblemished. Not a single thing blocked his vision, and he gazed upward. It seemed like his world was free of dragons too. The tree was alive, well more than a plant would be. He felt a connection to the tree and understood that it mostly just wanted to be left alone. It feared anything that would damage it. Mash wasn't sure if it was a spirit, but it didn't really matter. He would make sure that no one harmed the tree. When he thought about it, he felt an affirmation from the tree. It wasn't intelligent but just seemed to act on its survival instincts. That was fine, Mash would still treat it properly. Red suggested that spirits were somehow sacred, so he could at least treat it like a living being. Plus, it was here before him, and he didn't want to infringe on it. Whether the skill gave him the world or created it from scratch, this world was the tree's home. Mash might care too much for a simple tree, but he felt like it was the right decision. He sat there for a bit and just relaxed. The elders would be waiting, but he didn't let it bother him too much. How many days had it been since he just relaxed? Even if only for a few minutes. The time spent sorting through his memories certainly demanded some relaxation, but he just couldn't find the opportunity. Eventually, Red came and joined him. She didn't disrupt the rest but just sat with him on the large treetop. Mash opened his storage space and pulled out some snacks and drinks. Both of which became cold after a few seconds. Honestly, he thought he liked it more that way. Especially the drinks. They stayed for around an hour before deciding it was time to descend. This time Mash seemed to know of a path through the brush. It was strange, almost like the tree had shifted slightly to let him pass. The tree didn't move much, it just revealed an easily traversable path to him. The descent took significantly less time than the climb. Even still, the entire journey had been long enough to start changing the day to night. There are 2 moons. Look. Mash spoke aloud, extending his hands in opposite directions and pointing to what he thought was the north and south. 2 nearly identical moons could be seen. The one rising from the north was slightly bigger than the one in the south. The smaller one was slightly redder than the other. Seeing them both rise, he wondered if they would collide. You think they're going to crash? Red shook her head quickly but glanced between the 2 moons, nonetheless. Her explanation started soon after. No, I believe one is significantly closer than the other. Mash nodded, agreeing with her judgment. He examined the moons more closely and saw that he could make out more detail on the bigger one. He had initially attributed it to being larger, but now he could tell that it was probably a matter of distance. Two moons that rose on the line yet in opposite directions. Although, he wondered what would happen if two moons collided. Would it destroy the world? It was something he didn't want to experience. The elders were staring at the two moons as well. Mash saw them sitting on the ground, and they were eating something. This was the first time he had seen them actually eat something. It just looked like some simple berries, and he wondered where they got them. The forests here had only had one type of fruit. These were a lot smaller and were entirely black. As Mash touched down beside them, he asked them about their diet. Do you guys eat meat? I have some food if you want. The elders stiffened but relaxed upon seeing that it was him. They had probably been anxious, and Mash could see why. The two of them had been abandoned in a strange world, while their supposed protectors had been leisurely relaxing for an hour or two. He felt a little bad but was feeling much more comfortable now. It was like the break had washed away the tension. Helped him deal with the anger and frustration of interacting with Gerald. It even helped him settle his emotions. The elders both nodded. Yes, we do. We would be very interested in experiencing your culture. Elder AVG was bouncing on the balls of her feet. She was excited, and Mash wished he had something more extravagant to offer. After thinking about it for a moment, he realized he did have a special item he could offer. He had a few fruits from Eifel's world left, but they were extremely delicious. Opening his storage space, the two elders stepped back in alarm. A second later, Elder AVG walked closer and almost stepped into his storage space. Stop! Mash held his arm out to stop her. He had obviously been a bit too forceful with his words, and the elder practically scampered away. Although she managed enough composure to stop by the other elder. The two elders obviously had different ages. AVG acted significantly more childishly than Sirji. While she might just be a more genuine person, he felt like there was more to it than that. Her curious nature was too honest. She was also the one to speak her mind and had asked many questions related to their beliefs. It was her questions that had pried the information of their bodies out of Red. Oddly, Red struggled to interact with the girl. It was almost like she didn't know how to respond. Weirder still was the fact that she seemed to enjoy the conversations. Well, it was hard to dislike an honest person, and he had just frightened her. Sorry, I'm not angry. It's just that it might be unsafe. I feel like it's pretty safe but have been told it's risky to enter another's storage space. With that said, you can enter if you want to still. He knew that he was caving to the curious and hopeful gazes of the elders, but he didn't worry too much. The storage space was safe so long as nothing unexpected happened. It was only dangerous to utilize in a fight, but it should be fine here. The best word used to describe his world thus far was peaceful. Red didn't seem as happy with his response. He thought it was fine as he had explained the risk to it. It was ultimately the elder's decision. To his surprise, neither of them hesitated and started walking into his storage space. Mash followed behind them, to answer any questions and point things out if needed. Thank you. But we are elders and knowledge is our only desire. Elder Sirji spoke as he stepped past Mash. He was speed walking but slowed only to pass the words. Mash couldn't help but smile as he saw the childishness in the actions of the elders. The irony was not lost on Red either, or he saw her smiling from outside of the space. She hadn't entered and just stood at the edge. Mash saw that his storage space had grown since he had last been inside. He wondered what had happened. What's that? Mash heard AVG ask the question, and he saw her standing in front of a mutilated wyvern corpse. He looked at it, and physically smacked himself on the forehead. He was one for over-the-top gestures, but he had never done that before. The wyvern corpse was something he had forgotten about entirely. He easily could have used it instead of one of Priscilla's bodies when he had changed his core. But it had slipped his mind. Seeing it there, he wondered what he would do with it. Things like wyvern scales were only really good for making magical items and typically armor at that. Thus, it was useless to him. A wyvern corpse. It's a powerful monster. Mash could tell that his answer hadn't been sufficient. Both elders were obviously still curious, but he didn't want to explain everything. Although, it looked like they wouldn't leave it alone. I can tell that this creature was powerful. Its body still radiates great energy. How did this creature fight? The questions came from Elder Sergi, and Mash was caught off guard. That was usually the type of questions he got from the other elder. Mash thought of a response, but let it die in his mind. He was wildly incapable of properly describing the fight he had. It felt wrong to say anything and ruin the experience of the fight. He had another idea though. If you let me, I can send you my memories of it. Or a recreation of them, though you would have to accept my magic. Again, Mash was surprised by how little the two elders hesitated. They smiled eagerly, and both spoke in unison. Knowledge is everything. The way they both responded. He wondered if they were linked like Priscilla was to her bodies. He couldn't let such commitment down. Send it to them. And before you ask, I don't mind showing them my abilities. Mash could sense Priscilla's concern, and he stopped it early. That fight had been before his recent evolution, and any information from that time would be wildly inaccurate. He observed Priscilla's use of magic. It was something he still hadn't been very good at grasping. The elemental magic was easier to understand, but the mental stuff was complicated. Priscilla said that mental magic was typically hard to master. Her kind had a natural aptitude for it, even if she hadn't natively had the affinity. She explained that her connection with her bodies was a type of mental magic. It was a bodily function that replicated the magic. The elders seemed to receive the memory slowly, but it was over in a minute or two. Fights always felt longer than they were. The wyvern had been arrogant and given him plenty of time to recover between attacks. Even still, the whole fight was fast. It was one of the fights that he remembered fondly. When he had been sorting through his memories, it had been this fight that reminded him of the love of fighting. The desire to compete in such a complete way. To put everything on the line, both sides are fully ready to kill. He struggled with how much his wants and beliefs clashed now. The two elders finished observing the fight and turned to face Mash. Their expressions had changed a lot. It wasn't like they weren't respectful before, but the look he was getting now was something else. The way their eyes were slightly wide and focused, and the slight shuffling of their bodies were recognizable. Eifel's people had reacted much the same when they found out about his abilities. Although there was more awe than reverence here. It didn't look like the elders were going to treat him like a god, but he expected several more questions to come. Chapter 226, To End a War. Once the elders were finished with their interrogation and exploration of his storage space, they both seemed to have come to an agreement. That being that the world was sufficient, especially if Mash would guarantee some protection. He agreed and requested that they leave the large tree alone. To treat it as a powerful creature, and one not to be bothered. He told them to build their cities outside of the tree's domain. He didn't define a specific range, but they seemed to understand. After a little more exploration, they gave Mash a surprisingly detailed map that outlined where their cities would be. They used the large tree to center the map, but Mash realized that they even wrote down a speculated size of the tree. It was smaller than reality, but he didn't correct them. The accuracy of the rest of the map was impressive, but it seemed like they hadn't taken up that much space. He still didn't think it would be enough, but they insisted it would work. Apparently, on top of having a small world, there just weren't that many people either. They claimed that his world would easily be able to hold all of their people several times over, and that was before the losses they recently experienced. He couldn't help but feel bad when they mentioned it, even if they didn't blame him for it. The discussion had been interrupted by Jill, who arrived suddenly. She teleported directly in between Mash and the two elders. Her sudden arrival was mostly because the other side had finished their preparations. There were a few who adamantly did not want to abandon their world, but most had agreed to the move. That was good, and he knew that he couldn't do anything to convince those who would remain. It seemed like all people had a stubborn sense of nationality. Mash had asked about the children as they would be at the most at risk, but Jill said that none would remain. Even if some adults chose to stay and fight, they hadn't been willing to risk their children in the same way. The two elders with them asked to meet with the other elders. They believed that sharing information of the world would convince some of those that did not wish to leave. It wouldn't be hard, and the plan was set. Mash didn't open the portal, rather Jill teleported the two of them out into one of the cities. It was apparently the capital, a city known by Tavish. It housed the most people too. The world shifted and Mash dropped a short distance onto the stone below. Jill had set her anchor on a roof, it seemed. The stone was a grey color and was completely smooth. Mash wondered how they managed to make stone like this, as he knew now that they didn't have any traditional magic. His gaze drifted from the stone to the rest of the town, and he found it blocky. The whole city was shaped like a square and was packed with tall square buildings. Now that he saw how the city was designed, he could imagine how the elders had come up with the schematics for their map. The city had almost no free space, other than a single square near the center of town. It was a park, but the rest of the city was almost comical in its design. To him, it seemed like it was an intentional design meant to cram people into a small space. It was interesting but also a little jarring. Mash wasn't sure if he was fine with cities being like this. In the other city, he had been far more normal. He would ask them to design more like those even if it took up more space. It wasn't that the city didn't have its own charm. There was a cleanliness to the city that was unmatched. Mash didn't think he had ever seen a place so clean. The other surprising thing was the amount of movement. The efficient layout of the town allowed people to move more freely, and they easily moved through the streets. Mash could see that lines had formed from the main entrance, several carts also filled the streets there. As much as he wanted to explore the town, he knew he wouldn't have time for it. As soon as they arrived, the elders left, probably heading to meet with the others. It was decided that they would proceed with the plan in good faith, and the two elders would only confirm the validity. If they had decided to protest the decision, then Mash would try his best at closing the portals. They weren't sure if it was possible, but Jill might be able to manage it. Her accidental explosion might be able to mess with them. Although, the danger for that was a bit too high to test. Even if it did work, she didn't think she could avoid the backlash. Even if Mash or Luke were there to try and protect her, none of them wanted to take that risk. Plus, it might do even more damage to the world itself. That skill was too volatile to test with, so they settled on evacuation as the primary focus. It might be somewhat cowardly, but it would avoid a lot of death. The two elders that left would initiate the move. Mash knew he would have a few minutes before the thing started, and he wanted to explore the city with the time he had left. "I'm going to walk to the entrance. Come get me, if I'm late." Mash spoke and jumped from the roof. He dropped toward the ground and used wind magic to control his fall. He easily avoided any people and had begun his exploration of the streets. There were many children and women walking the street. The children of both the Kishiv and whatever the elders were was recognizable. The women were also recognizable but only because of their clothing. Most women here wore large robe-like clothing, whereas the males wore much tighter bound cloth. The variety of colors in the clothing made the streets look like they were painted by a child. It was interesting to see. The buildings had wooden walls but stone floors and ceilings. The stone was smooth while the walls had divisions in them that were more similar to bricks. Wooden bricks were something he wasn't expecting to see. He couldn't help but rub his hands against one of the walls. That prompted several more whispers, all of which he chose to ignore. The stairs were the more annoying part anyways. Almost everyone looked towards him, even going so far as to tap others to alert them of his presence. It was foolish to think that he could explore the city freely, but he was just curious. It may have been a mistake, but he kept his gaze straight. Although, he paused when he heard some of the whispers. "He's the reason for this. Only a child. The elders think he will save us. Is this really a wise choice? I wonder what power he holds." They chased him, but the ones that stood out the most were the ones that mentioned his involvement. The people here knew what he had done. The elders had kept their word and spread the truth to these people. However, the reason he froze was the lack of blame being thrown his way. The voices he could hear spoke instead of concern and disbelief. Many of the people treated him as a child. He didn't expect it, considering that he looked nothing like either of the races here. These people were far more understanding than his own. That was one worry that was building slowly in his mind. How would his own people take the truth? His family aside, he was sure that most people wouldn't be forgiving. Depending on how many had died on his word, he could understand receiving some serious punishment. Mash knew firsthand how cruel his people could be to kids, and he was far older now than he was back then. The people here were showing a lot of empathy, and he was glad that they were the ones going to his world first. He would need to be careful about how he handles his world going forward. These people weren't very strong, and they seemed to be kinder than most as well. He thought about that as he roamed through the city. The people here looked more monstrous than most, but that didn't make them monsters. On the other hand, Daniel's people were unnaturally perfect looking, yet they were consumed by a primal lust for power. Gerald especially had been desperate for it. Mash would confront them one more time and tell them of what he did. Well, he wouldn't meet with Gerald but would speak to Daniel once more. Daniel was a good person, regardless of what the rest of his people were like. The city was fairly uniform and not much had changed as he walked through it. The one thing he noticed was more of those servitors about. They cleaned the street and guided people. With those things around, maintaining a city became easy. He wondered if the elders were going to bring them. It would certainly help with developing some of their cities. Mash would help too. At the very least, he could set up some of the foundations for the cities. As he got closer to the gate, he started seeing the caravans, most of which were filled with cattle. The beasts looked somewhat like a mix between cows and pigs but were a bit larger than them. They didn't make any noise, which was a little odd. He arrived at the front gates before the elders and saw Jill, Red, and Luke standing there. They were talking with one another, but Mash noticed that there were no elders yet. He slowly walked towards the others, seeing the rows of people lined up. Mash wondered how big he could make a portal and guessed this was the best time to test. The others noticed him, and Luke waved him over. "We were told to tell you to make the portal now. The elders want to know how big it can be." Luke spoke once Mash was close. It was something Mash himself was curious about. He nodded and walked past them without stopping. "Got it. It will be something new for me too." Mash stopped a few feet away from them, but close enough for them to help him if something went wrong. He didn't think anything would happen, but he wasn't sure what would happen if he half-finished something. Focusing on the pace before him, he imagined a massive archway forming. His energy drained rapidly, and he realized that he would be vulnerable after doing something like this. He trusted that the others could protect him and finished the portal. It had drained nearly all of his energy. It was larger than the city gates and could easily let all of the people through. Mash knew he would need to recover his energy and sat down to use his inhuman hibernation but froze. His mind was still recovering, and he was still working through some things. Using this skill now would be problematic. The plan demanded it of him though. The dirt beneath his hands crunched as he closed his hands into fists. He wanted to use the skill without altering his mind but didn't know if it was possible. Instead of trying it on his own, he told Priscilla to try and defend his mind from the skill. He just had to hope that she could stop that aspect. Chapter 227, Evacuation. The skill started and he instantly started to feel his energy recover. That was expected. However, he couldn't limit his skill. Even with Priscilla's efforts, she couldn't stop the skill from taking effect. His body was healing, and he could feel his disordered thoughts disappearing. They didn't vanish from his memories, but just kind of fixed themselves into a place. The confusion and conflict he had been feeling were somehow less now. Some of his hesitation and doubt about the current plan diminished. His current course of action felt more set in stone, but he tried to resist it. This was not the only thing that had led him down his path, but he knew that it had a big impact. The skill was forcibly building his own resolve. He never would have imagined a healing effect to be a cost of using a skill. The way it helped clear his mind of doubts and re-establish his norm was disturbing now. The bigger problem was that the skill was too necessary to ignore. Unlike the others who had enough wisdom to rely on natural regeneration to recover their mana, Mash had too much energy. His wisdom was simply too low to overcome the necessity of this skill. He wanted to stop it from influencing his mind though. Try injuring yourself. Perhaps it won't heal both things. Mash didn't waver and immediately stabbed his thigh with his right hand. His fingers sharpened into claws as he dug into the leg. He had to stop his meditation to do so but started again right away. This time the healing did work slower. Or rather it was focused on restoring his leg first. It significantly slowed his energy recovery but did seem to halt his mental one. It worked but he knew that it was a poor method. "What are you doing?" Luke bent over to heal Mash. His hand immediately went to Mash's leg. Mash had to rush to get his words out, otherwise Luke would have healed the wound completely. "Stop. No, don't heal me. I'm trying to control the skill." Seeing Luke stop, Mash returned to the matter at hand. This method was flawed in that it reduced his energy recovery too much. Plus, he would need to regularly injure himself to even recover a third of his energy. "Priscilla, try to stop any magic from going to my head." She could do some things independent of him, and he hoped that she could use anti-magic to stop his own skill. Even if other aspects of his body were magical, this was a risk he was willing to take. Especially since Luke was literally standing mere inches from him. Even if something went wrong, he wasn't alone this time. "Yes. I will tell the others of your plan as well." Mash gave her a mental nod and continued using his meditation skill. He focused on the skill and tried to mold it around his head. It was a function of energy, and he should be able to manipulate it. He knew that skills could change, and he was hoping to do exactly that. He wanted to be able to alter the skill and make it leave his mind alone. Even if the skill became weaker for it. Mash felt when Priscilla's anti-magic started. It felt like someone had dunked his head in ice water. A shiver ran down his entire body, and his vision blurred. His mind grew dizzy like someone had spun him around a dozen times. What was happening? He was trying to figure out what was causing such a reaction but maintained his skill. He could feel that his energy was recovering, and he knew that the plan was working. Well, it was kind of working. His energy recovery was fine, and his mental state wasn't healing, but there was a consequence. It felt like he was doing damage to his mind in the process. It seemed like he was reliant on his energy to maintain his normal behavior. Even beyond that, he needed energy to even see properly at this point. That probably meant that there was a constant drain on his energy, but it was normally so insignificant that he wouldn't notice. Now that he had stopped any energy from reaching his mind, he realized that he couldn't survive without it. Energy might as well be considered life at this point. Still, he held on. Only once his energy was fully restored did he let the skill end. He let out a long sigh and saw Luke looking at him anxiously. His friends were all watching very carefully. Priscilla had told them about what he was doing, but that didn't mean that they would just relax because they knew though. Seeing their faces, he knew he needed to respond. I think it worked. Mash phrased it more like a question than he meant, but he wasn't certain either. Red spoke up, her words reminding Mash of something obvious. Check your status. How many times are you going to need a reminder? Her tone told him just how tired she was of reminding him of that. She wasn't the only one. Mash tended to try and use his domain or Priscilla to check his condition. He didn't really know why either, but actually checking his status was something he only ever did when he leveled. He did it now though. In human hibernation, Broken, you have stolen the techniques of mages and monks to form an artificial technique, your inhuman body morphing it to fit your corrupted nature. Hibernating will increase the rate at which your body recovers, healing only physical wounds. Current rate, plus 200% recovery. Mash's mouth fell open as he saw the changes. It was worse than he expected. The skill lost its capacity to heal him outside of physical injury. That was bad. He was already resistant to physical wounds. It was usually attacks on his soul or something that was really problematic. His skill had helped him recover when he damaged his core too, and now it wouldn't do that either. It was arrogance. So far, all the changes to his skills had been positive, and he had become complacent. He expected a change to the skill would mean an improvement. He shut his eyes, to try and avoid the faces of his friends. He started telling them of the change but didn't want to see their reactions. He couldn't hide from them with his domain. It showed him everything, even if he didn't want to see it. I messed up. The skill says it's broken now, and it will only heal physical injuries. Even with his eyes shut, he saw the confusion on their faces. Their disoriented eyes focused and their reactions varied. Red was definitely looking at him like he was an idiot. Jill frowned deeply, but it was Luke's reaction that was most surprising. His breathing quickened, and he started muttering something loudly. Mash, you needed that skill. You were the only one who could heal yourself. You barely take physical damage. You also get hit a lot. How are you going to deal with that? Unlike Jill, you can't just teleport to me if you need heals. What is your plan now? Luke was speaking quickly, though he wasn't really seeking a response. It felt like he was venting his thoughts as if he was releasing more than just his concern for this moment. Red was nodding along with everything Luke was saying. Mash was still seated on the ground, and Luke was looming over him as he spoke. Mash wanted to stand and meet Luke's eyes. He needed to calm Luke down, but he didn't get the chance as the Kishiv started moving. The large group of people began entering the portal, and Mash was distracted as several elders were walking toward them. Thinking quickly, he grabbed Luke's shoulder and shook him roughly while mouthing the word later. He turned Luke a little so that he could see the elders. Thankfully, that was enough to calm him down. We do need to figure something out. Red added before the elders had come into earshot. Mash caught Jill rolling her eyes and receiving a glare from Red in return. It seemed like Jill wasn't very worried. She would probably say something later. Now, they had something else to deal with. All of them waited for the elders to start speaking and just waved at them. There were 4 elders total, though Mash only recognized Sirji and Avg. The other two elders wore different colors too. Sirji and Avji wore their suits, while these two wore pink robes. They were bright and made for an interesting contrast with their bone-white skin and pitch-black teeth. Those teeth would never seem natural. Elder Sirji started to say something when he got close. "We have begun the great transfer." Mash choked on nothing and cleared his throat. The noise was more intimidating than he intended, and the two elders who had seen his battle with the wyvern flinched. The two new elders seemed much older and more confident. They had noticeable wrinkles around the eyes, and Mash wondered how old they were. He knew that Sirji was several hundred years old, and he still didn't have any signs of great age. His body tensed when the elders stopped. Mash expected one of them to blame him, to demand something that he couldn't do. Neither did though. Instead, they both bowed to Mash. He reacted quickly, placing one hand on each of their shoulders, and he pulled them up. The movement was too quick, and their eyes opened wider. However, Mash didn't want them to bow. That was not something he wanted from any of them. All he was doing was making reparations for his mistakes. If anything, he should be the one bowing his head. He was about to do just that but was stopped as one of the new elders started speaking. "Hello, I am Elder Servi. My brother has told me much about your world. I am excited to explore it." The elder who had spoken indicated toward Sirji. Mash couldn't really tell that they were siblings. With how all of them had matching skin and hair colors, which made it difficult to discern any differences among them. The relation didn't really matter much, he was more curious about what they had said prior. "What do you mean by great transfer?" He didn't like how grandiose they were making this sound. It sounded like the kind of thing people would attribute to a god or prophet. He did not want to be treated as anything special. In his mind, all he was doing was correcting his mistakes. Regardless of the cause, this day will have great significance to our people for the foreseeable future. It is appropriate to give it an appropriate name. The elder's response made sense, and Mash could tell that it was already too late to change it. It had clearly already been spread, and nothing he could do would change it. The elders spoke of their plans while they waited for all of the people to pass through the portal. These four elders would begin to organize the people and start the construction of several cities. Mash took this opportunity to say that he would prefer more normal cities, rather than this blocky structure. He didn't have a great reason for it, but they didn't ask him for one. They agreed but mentioned they would need more space. Mash happily granted them whatever space they wanted. Even if they took up twice as much space, there would still be plenty left over. His world was large, even bigger than he could picture. The elders had done something to estimate the size and implied that there should be several other continents outside of the one he opened a portal to. Eventually, he would fly around his world, but it would take too long for him to do it now. Chapter 228, Great Transfer. The move was progressing smoothly. They had been jumping from city to city regularly. The elders were using their servitors to distract any of the people from Daniel's side. It worked well, and so far, there had been no opposition to the move. Mash hoped it would stay that way. Although, he didn't have high hopes as they moved toward the towns with smaller populations. These were positioned on the outskirts, and while none were very close to the portals, they simply didn't have any good way to monitor those areas. Despite going as fast as possible, it had still been several hours since they started, and would take several more hours yet. Only one elder had stuck with them for the whole process. Elder Sirji was organizing the movement in every city or town they arrived at. They also had a method for long-distance communications and were keeping watch of cities. If Gerald and his people arrived, then they would know. Jill could easily go over there and end any fighting preemptively. She probably wouldn't need help, but all of them could go with her for a little additional cost. The bigger concern was the caravans that were ferrying people from town to town. Even now hundreds of people would be moving to consolidate in the bigger cities. The elders had designed a route to save everyone, even if it wasn't possible. However, they didn't know of anything beyond their own continent. It wasn't that they hadn't explored beyond their nation, rather they couldn't find any sophisticated life beyond it. There may be wanderers or undiscovered natives, but it would be impossible to know or help them. Mash could understand, but he still wished he could check those lands too. Even if there were only beasts and monsters, he enjoyed exploring the unknown. Time progressed, and they were met with monotony. Despite the grand name given to the event, little happened to obscure them. It seemed like the servitors were doing a good job at delaying any fights. Even with the relative ease, Mash was on edge. His change in his skill had been bothering him, but he was more worried about his surroundings. If he had learned anything from looking through his memories, it was to expect something dramatic to happen. He practically drew those kinds of events toward himself. When Elder Sergi started to panic, Mash was already on his way. He ran over to the elder, interposing himself immediately. What happened? His words synced with his friends who understood his anxiety. They had been privy to nearly every event and had probably developed the same conclusions as him. The elder seemed confused by their simultaneous question. There is a fight outside of Portest. It is the Blue City on the river. The elder added the second bit with a slight delay. Jill hadn't been very good at remembering the names of the towns and cities but could picture them if she was given a description. Thankfully, that was enough for her skill. Jill nodded once, before turning her attention to the west. She was probably focusing on the location of the city. The elder looked like he wanted to say more, but Jill spoke first. Be prepared for a fight. The elder must have noticed the urgency in her voice, as he tried to force his words out. Mash only caught a single word before the teleport had carried them away. Take. The world shifted around him. 1 second the elder was standing there, the next Mash was atop a wall looking over a distinctly blue city. The first thing to grab his attention was the blue grass that grew in between the buildings. He should probably get more used to seeing such things. However, seeing something he was so familiar with being a different color was just odd. It was bad and gave the city a sense of camouflage as all the buildings were similarly blue. When he heard fighting, he turned his head quickly. Away from the city, Mash could hear metal strike against metal. He would like to say that he recognized the sound of a fight, but that was not true. What he heard here was the occasional suppressed explosion, followed by sound screams. In his world, fights were usually more bombastic than this. He would have expected to see balls of fire. The noise itself made him certain of his world's relative strength. Let's go. Mash, stay here and open a portal. Red spoke up, taking charge of the group and issuing some quick orders. Mash had been preparing to leap towards the fight but stopped and stumbled forward. He stopped himself from falling by grabbing onto the stone of the wall. The wall of the city had supports along the top to prevent people from falling, and it would provide protection to archers as well. Before he could make any protests, the others were gone. Only Jill remained long enough to give him a shit-eating grin before teleporting away. He glanced once more in the direction of the fight, a longing slowly filled his chest, but he turned away. It had already been decided that he would help evacuate people rather than fight. Mash looked over the town, which seemed mostly unharmed at the moment. The typical lines had formed at one of the entrances. Even better was the fact that he could spot some elders by one of the gates. It would save him the trouble of trying to maintain the peace himself. He jumped toward what he assumed was the main gate. It was easily the largest one in the city and was blue like everything else. He honestly shouldn't have been surprised, but still wondered how they had managed to get so much blue paint. His jump wasn't enough to carry him to the elder, but he managed to cover the needed distance with just his wind magic. He hadn't even needed to form wings, though his landing was worse than it would have been with them. The ground cracked loudly as he landed beside the elder. This elder had reacted quickly though and easily turned to Mash. There was almost no worry as he bowed his head to Mash, who once again felt the need to stop him. Although, Mash was too slow, as he focused on his wind magic. He wanted to see how he could improve the landing, or if he could use it to help him in a fight. Hello, young savior. I am Elder Ver. Mash didn't say anything immediately. He expected the elder to say more. After nothing was said, he realized that the name didn't follow the pattern. He had just assumed that it would be the case. It was the same mistake he made before, and he discreetly punched himself. It wasn't very discreet as Mash wanted it to hurt. Plus, the sound of his hand slamming against his thigh was loud enough to get several in the lines to turn their heads. I'm sorry, I assumed there would be. You know what, never mind. Let me just make the portal. He felt like commenting on his name would be rude. The familiar archway of his portal started to form behind the elder. It was large enough to match the gate that the city had. Mash could have managed something bigger but wanted to save some energy for a fight. Even if Hunt triggered, he wanted to make sure he could actually do something without relying on the skill. The elder started responding while Mash worked on the portal. It is no bother. I simply have not achieved a grand work and have not earned the moniker. I expect that I will need to restart it. Mash wanted to protest and insist that he could bring whatever it was. He never got the option to make his argument. The elder's next words caused his own to vanish. Do not misunderstand, I chose this path myself. I expect a new start on the project would provide the insight that I am lacking. Perhaps, I will find something better in your world. The elder spoke with wisdom, and he carried the wrinkles that told Mash of great age. The older elders were extremely old, approaching the same age as some of the immortals back home. It seemed like the elders naturally had a long lifespan and had managed to maintain it with a special diet. Mash didn't think it was their diet that was affecting them, but he didn't say anything about it. He didn't want to do anything that could change their decisions. Honestly, it still felt like he was rushing most of his decisions. While he did need to do things quickly at the moment, it didn't mean that he shouldn't think about things more critically. He wasn't completely hopeless as he had at least told the others beforehand. That was progress in his mind. He decided not to take the blame in this situation and take the elder's words at face value. The portal finished, and Mash nodded towards it. It's good to go. Mash didn't know why he said it like that, but the elder understood. The elder started orchestrating the move. He was very involved, standing at the front and rushing the people through the portal. Even if he seemed relaxed, it was clear that he was worried about the sounds in the distance. It seemed like the fighting was continuing, and he wished to go and help. He would need to recover his energy first. Thankfully, he didn't need to worry about the skill messing with his mind anymore. He may come to regret that decision, but for now, it was a huge relief. His energy started to recover, and he tried to speed it up as much as he could. It obviously changed nothing, and he continued to restore energy at the same rate as before. The noises from the distance were both distracting and enticing. He wanted to partake in the fight and get a reprieve from the monotony of the great transfer. So far, it had not been great but just kind of dull. His hopes died as the noises died down. It seemed like he missed his opportunity and was sure of the fact when Jill teleported back. Fighting is over. Red and Luke are going to escort the people back through the portal. Told us to keep going. I'll grab them later. Jill always started speaking a little too early. The teleports were natural to her, but not to anyone else. Even though he was the fastest at catching her because of his domain, it was still jarring to suddenly hear her voice from beside him. He was slowly getting used to it. The moment would be quite grand when he didn't flinch at her arrival. Anything exciting happen? Mash asked the question hollowly, his voice carrying his regret. He noticed Jill shrug her shoulders before responding. Not really. Nobody there was strong enough to do any real damage. No masters as far as we could tell. Red thinks they're planning something big. She wanted to interrogate some of the people, but Luke stopped her. He was glad for the update, but she sounded more conflicted about the situation. Maybe, she felt strongly about the interrogation? He didn't really care much either way. He doubted Red would do anything like torture after how guilty she had felt about her advancement. Just intimidating people sounded fine to him. He did similar things all the time. It was practically his way of introducing himself at this point. It was something else he should probably change about himself. He sighed and turned the conversation to something lighter, as he regarded the moving crowd. Jill always seemed the one most eager to engage in nonsensical conversation. Luke and Red always had this air of seriousness about them. As the conversation progressed onto more mundane subjects, he noticed that the lines were dwindling. The people were moving quickly, and it seemed like they would be ready to move to the next city soon. In this case, it would be returning to the city where Elder Sirji was it. Mash sighed, it was time to begin again. Chapter 229, Confrontation. The rest of the Great Transfer was completely normal. There were no more fights or anything, and it seemed like Gerald's people had backed off completely. Mash wondered if Daniel had managed to change their minds. If he did, the bigger question was how. Gerald had seemed desperate for immortality, and the look in his eyes was not one of someone who was likely to bend or break. Mash just hoped that nothing bad had happened to Daniel, but he wasn't sure. The longer they had gone without any interruptions, the greater the fear became. It had wormed into his thoughts. He shared it with the others, but they expected the worst punishment Daniel could receive would be imprisonment. That didn't change the group's decision in the slightest. As soon as the last of the people got to his world, he closed the portal and started meditating immediately. Luke picked him up and started heading towards the entrance to Daniel's world. There were plenty of portals that would lead them there, but they wanted to be as close to Virtuous Sun sect as possible. Other than Daniel, he didn't really know anyone else in his world. The travel was quick, even if he wasn't the one flying. Luke was still plenty fast with his own skills. It did give Mash enough time to recover his energy, although he didn't really want to start any fights. His plan was to just tell Gerald of the situation and then leave. Honestly, Mash didn't even owe them that much, but he didn't want Daniel to suffer needlessly. Once they found out that there was nothing left on this side, then they would have no reason to detain Daniel. That or he could break him out if he wanted. Mash wouldn't mind taking Daniel to his world or actual home too. He felt somewhat responsible for putting Daniel in his current situation and wanted to do what he could. As the portal came into sight, they slowed their approach. The trees around the portal were destroyed, and Mash knew that there was probably a fight here at some point. The crater was slightly bigger now too. They didn't need to slow their arrival like that, but rushing through would make them seem hostile. It was a better idea to go slowly and just react to an attack. It would hopefully give them the opportunity to at least try and defuse the situation without violence. Or any displays of grand power. Mash didn't want to do that again. He didn't need more people to fear him irrationally. Well, he guessed it was pretty rational considering what he would seem like to them. Mash wasn't a dragon, but he imagined that he had to be getting there. He wasn't human anymore, and he would bet that his new race was pretty special. Luke stopped before the portal, unceremoniously depositing Mash on his feet. He couldn't help but think of when he had been carrying Jill. How she had used him as a spring to jump from. That was a long time ago. Wait, it was only a couple of months ago, wasn't it? It felt like it was something from his distant past. He shook his head slowly, as he made to head into the portal. Jill was the first to enter, and Mash followed in a close second along with Red. Luke had the rear so that he could heal any damage that could happen from a trap or ambush. The world shifted around him. The familiar crater filled his domain, as he appeared on the other side. His vision came quickly, and he was somewhat disappointed to see nothing. That thought was a little troubling. He craved a good fight and had been unable to do anything for the last one. Even if the fight would be pointless, he was still hoping for a scrap. All he wanted to do was experience new powers and abilities, but had been unable to leave his job for even a moment. After receiving a path, he had an idea of how complex they could be. He was curious to see what skills other people would have. Mash knew where the sect was, but they decided to travel on foot this time. Flying into the city would be a mistake. They had no idea what to expect from the sect, but they didn't want to provoke them more. The group walked quickly. Well, some jogged and others ran. Mash was happy to see that he was one of the faster in the group. His agility wasn't the highest, but his body was more suited to the high stats. Unlike Jill, who was still adjusting, Mash's body did most of the work. At the moment, he got to enjoy being the fastest among them. They didn't make it an official race, but all four of them were moving quickly. A normal race wouldn't be fair, so Jill and Mash took some handicaps. Mash and Jill were forced to carry some weights, which ultimately benefited him more than Jill. It still wasn't a very close race. Mash was ahead, though not by much. Jill followed close behind, though she was obviously struggling more with the weight. Red and Luke were slowly catching up, but it would be too late for them to have a genuine shot. The race was just to the end of the forest, and Mash sped up when he saw an opening in the tree line. The exit was in sight, and this time he wouldn't let himself get tripped up by anything. Unsurprisingly, Mash came in first, with Jill in second, and Luke and Red at the end. That means you cook. Jill spoke while bent over and taking a few big breaths. She must have really struggled with the additional weight, and Mash realized it might have to do with her constitution. Her advancements had gradually made her body lighter, and he wouldn't be surprised to find out that it made it harder to lift heavy items. The words themselves caused Mash to start chuckling. They were familiar. He could remember a time when he was saddled with a similar punishment. He remembered making that sweet stew and getting many questions about his addiction to sugar. Comparing that to what he ate lately was a little disturbing. If he just considered all of the raw meat, then it was already fairly disgusting. It got worse when he thought about the creatures he had eaten alive. He knew that there had been several times where he ate a creature while it was still alive, albeit that was usually done through his wooden imitations. The sect was mostly unchanged, though Mash did feel like it was quieter. Not many signs of movement could be seen nor heard. He did notice the occasional passerby, but they didn't feel like Daniel or Gerald. They felt more normal, as if they didn't have a path. As they got closer to the sect, they noticed fewer people wandering about. Already it had seemed like the surrounding city had been gutted, but it was beginning to feel more ominous the closer he got. Once they were near the gate into the sect, Red spoke, hammering in the ominous feeling that was sneaking into his thoughts. I feel a lot of blood and death. Red's words caused his fists to tighten. His earlier expectation that Daniel would be fine had broken. Mash feared for the life of his friend and started moving a bit faster. The smell of blood hit him as soon as he stepped past the gates. It was like they had been holding it back this whole time. Now it filled the air with its usual scent. The quiet within the sect was also worrisome. Mash wasn't the first to start flying, but he was the fastest. He didn't hold back, choosing his wyvern wings for their speed. Overtaking his friends, he darted toward the tower at the top of the mountain. Gerald would probably be there. If not, his corpse would be. The mountain blurred as they reached the apex in a few seconds. Mash didn't hesitate to climb over the lip of the tower and land where he expected to see Gerald. Instantly, Mash noticed the difference with Gerald. Something about his very presence had changed. His domain let him know that Gerald was a lot stronger now. He had probably advanced at least one time. The others arrived in time to hear him. "What did you do?" Mash was shouting, but he didn't bother restraining himself. The question was rather pointless too. The truth was obvious. Gerald had killed a lot of people for this. Mash couldn't help but take the blame. It was Mash's fault. He had prevented Gerald from seeking power in the other world, but he had done it too late. Gerald had gained the taste for power and was close to achieving his goals. Mash knew how easy it was to ignore other concerns when you were close to something. He had done similar things to gain his own power. The obvious things he had pushed aside to focus on his own desires. Whether they were selfish or not, he had been the same as Gerald. That connection only fueled the rage. Gerald didn't say anything but turned to acknowledge Mash's presence. The robes Gerald was wearing had changed. They were made of a silver and gold cloth and wrapped around him tightly. They framed his body well and made him look bigger than he actually was. "So, you have finished with the other world. Congratulations. I had found that those who explored that world had come back with more than enough power for my own advancement." Mash didn't really want a response from Gerald, and the easy tone he was using felt like he was jamming nails in Mash's ears. Why did he even bother explaining? It felt entirely too pointless, and it wouldn't change anything. Mash would need to fight Gerald and probably kill him too. He could tell from how the others had tensed up that they were thinking the same thing. Although Mash had something else, he wanted to ask. What about Daniel? Mash needed to hear the answer. He felt conflicted and guilty. Already suspecting the worst, he realized he hoped for it too. If Daniel was alive and all of his friends were dead, that wouldn't be much better. Honestly, Mash didn't know what he would prefer in that situation. Whether to die along with all his friends or be the one to live through it all. Each situation was awful. Gerald's expression didn't change in the slightest. His response came in a cold and unforgiving tone. The hate was obvious despite the relative lightness of his words. He is a traitor and has been dealt with. This conversation grows boring. Mash's eyebrow twitched when Gerald said dealt with. The implication bothered him more than he could accept. He didn't know why, but Mash knew that Daniel was a good person. Learning that he had been killed because of what Mash had done was grating. Gerald rose to his feet, but Mash didn't give him the chance and jumped at him. Something unexpected happened, and Mash felt as if he stepped into another domain. It was identical to his own, but a lot smaller. That wasn't the only thing Gerald revealed. His blood formed into a sleek blade which he jabbed at Mash's throat. Mash blocked with one of his hands and pushed through to strike Gerald. His robes hardened into metal and rose to block the fist. It bent as Mash's hand became draconic, his muscles bulging from the form. Gerald slid across the tower's top but stayed standing. Jill appeared beside him, striking toward his head. If her weapon made contact, the fight would be over. Gerald did something surprising and teleported across the space to stand beside Luke. The blade of blood swinging to slice Luke across one of his arms. The blade couldn't cut through Luke's defenses, and he retaliated by swinging his arm in an arc. Gerald was caught off guard, but he teleported again. He only moved a few inches but managed to dodge the swing. Mash froze, realizing what was happening with his domain. Chapter 230, Bargaina. He's copied our skills. Jill was the first to yell the words, but all of them had recognized it already. Seeing someone use your skills was rather obvious. Mash's mind was racing with questions, trying to understand how Gerald was stealing their abilities. Since Mash still had his domain and could feel Gerald's domain too, then it probably would block his abilities in any way. Mash guessed that he couldn't still have any skill either, as he would have picked something stronger than the domain. Even Jill's teleportation wasn't her strongest skill. He needed to know how the ability worked. Mash needed to how many skills, and what it was based on. If he had Luke's healing, this fight would be near impossible to win. He could just teleport away and heal continuously. Mash made a mental count of what Gerald had displayed thus far. His domain, Jill's teleportation, and Red's blood control. 3 good skills, but not their strongest. He probably couldn't choose, and maybe he could only get one. Was it random? When and how did he take them? Range? It was an idea, and he told Jill to teleport. Teleport up, as high as you can. Mash yelled the words, as he leaped toward Gerald's location. He didn't aim for where he was, but where his next teleport was taking him. His domain let him get a small jump on the location like it did when sparring with Jill. Even if Ki wasn't Mana, he found that he could see its traces just like with Mana. Jill was gone already, Priscilla helping and explaining his ideas to the others. At that moment, he couldn't be more glad for giving her the permission to share important ideas with the others without checking with him. He often forgot that she was much better at multitasking than he was. He turned out to be wrong, and Gerald teleported again. He was getting faster and more accurate. His blade actually stabbed simultaneously with his teleport and Mash couldn't dodge even if he saw it coming. Mash hadn't been slacking though, and he partially transformed. He altered his body, making it more durable by changing his muscles. The dragon had strong muscles and he decided that would be better than the scales at the moment. The blade of blood splashed against his skin rather than cut through it. His control still wasn't as good as Red's. Who seemed to recognize that, as the blade magically bent away from Mash and started digging into Gerald's own hand. His response was to scream aloud and let go of the blade. Mash caught Red smiling, and he couldn't help but mimic the gesture. That was one ability he would not be able to use. As he was reacting to the sudden pain, Jill appeared behind him. She attempted to stab him through the heart. He dodged it with a teleport. He could probably keep up with Jill thanks to the domain. However, he wasn't ready for Mash to swing with additional speed and reach. His arm grew longer as he used wood to reinforce it and stretch it. Adding more power to his strikes were Luke's buffs, which flared to life on all of them. Gerald hadn't been prepared for that one, and Mash's fist struck him squarely in the robe. Gerald's robe had morphed, becoming something closer to metal. His collar grew high enough that it attempted to catch Mash's fist. It succeeded and failed all at the same time. Gerald was fast enough to block the attack, but he was not strong enough. Even with a makeshift shield. Mash's strike dented the metal and kept pushing. The knuckles of his wooden hand squarely landed just perfectly. Pushing the metal into Gerald's eye and cheek, he just pushed as much as he could. Gerald was sent flying. His whole body twirled with a punch, a crunching noise that was loud enough to be heard spread from the strike. Mash was a little worried that his strike would carry him over the ledge. It didn't though, as Luke caught him. Golden light formed into a replica of a human body and superimposed itself onto Luke. It encased Gerald, trapping him completely, and it became thicker around his eyes. "I think this will stop his teleports." He spoke but looked to Jill for confirmation. Mash could see that Jill was nodding, but he interjected as fast as he could. "No, he has my domain." Luke's eyes widened slightly, but he wasn't able to react in time. Gerald appeared beside him and stabbed him with a metal blade. One that seemed to have grown out of his robes. Luke was faster than him though and attempted to catch the metal blade with his hand. To everyone's surprise, the blade cut through Luke's fingers without even slowing down, and it wasn't stopping. It was headed for his throat, but Luke was stunned by his sudden loss of fingers. Mash couldn't react in time, but he was never the fastest one. Jill appeared beside Luke, causing Gerald to teleport and dodge. However, he moved into Red's aimless-looking swing. Mash wondered when she had coordinated that with Jill and was a little jealous. He wished he had planned something like that. It barely nicked him, but it had managed to pierce his cheek a little. It was enough, and black specks started spreading on his face. Mash had heard about what her skill did and had been expecting his veins to turn black. It didn't seem to work like that at all. Instead, his skin started to turn grey around the wound and black spots spread on him like a rash. It was distinctly more horrifying than his veins turning black, and Mash made a mental note to be more careful when sparring with Red. Gerald was panicking now, and Mash could feel the fear enter his domain. Mash guessed that meant that he hadn't stolen any healing abilities from Luke, although he might have had another. Mash was fairly confident that his attack should have crushed Gerald's eye, but he seemed to be able to see perfectly fine. It wasn't a certainty, but the skill was obviously not good enough to deal with Red's infection. That much was proved by the panic on his face. Luke was glowing like a light, and he practically teleported himself. He might have been as fast as Mash's top speed, which was a scary thought. Mash's body hadn't been able to withstand that speed. Even if Luke wasn't going quite as fast as Mash had been, he was still far faster than normal. He swung at Gerald's head, and Mash wondered if he would kill him. The fist turned into a grab. Gerald tried to teleport out of the way, but Jill reacted first, teleporting Luke alongside him. His hand connected and he grabbed Gerald by the head. A large golden hand seemed to swallow his entire head. Luke didn't crush his skull but shook it violently. Mash realized, at that moment, that he wouldn't have cared if Luke decided to kill him in that attack. If anything, Mash had been hoping for it. This was not the time to have an internal conflict, and he decided to take Luke's earlier advice. That was something he would do before going to bed. Gerald was being shaken roughly. It got to the point that Mash was pretty sure that Gerald had fallen unconscious. Actually, it might have happened from the first push. Now, it just looked like Luke was shaking a kid's doll as Gerald's unconscious body flapped wildly. Red tapped his shoulder a few times and Luke stopped, and let go of Gerald, who proceeded to fall to the ground unconscious. He slumped in an unflattering way with his body bent into a triangle. The next question was what to do with him. He was still infected with Red's skill, and Mash wasn't sure if she could prevent it. Luke might be able to though. As if acknowledging Mash's idea, he placed a hand on the cut and the disease did retreat slowly. Honestly, he hadn't expected that considering how much of Gerald's face had turned grey. Another few seconds and he would have died for sure. That did beg the question though. Why are you saving him? Mash couldn't keep his mouth shut as the oddness of the situation hit him. Luke paused in his healing and looked up. Similarly, Red and Jill turned to meet his eyes. I thought it was what we wanted. None of us were trying to kill him in the fight. Mash didn't really have a response to that. After all, it was the truth. If Mash wanted to kill him, he would have transformed at the start of the fight. Similarly, Red would have used some of her other skills to seriously hurt him. Even with his teleports, he would have suffered from those. Fighting to kill would have drastically changed the result. Either way, Mash didn't want to be involved in the decision. He just wanted to find Daniel. I'll go look for Daniel. You guys can figure this out. Nope. You can't just avoid making decisions. I mean seriously. Jill's rebuttal was so automatic, that he wondered if she had been expecting him to do that. Was it foresight, or could she just read him that easily? Mash obeyed though. He recognized what he was doing and knew that he should at least try and add his input. Red spoke up first, and Mash was relieved with the idea. Let's get Daniel and have him decide. If I were him, I would want to be the one to decide. He agreed that it was a good idea. Red and Luke were in charge of keeping Gerald here. Red infected him with her skill, and Luke was the only one who could heal him. Even if Gerald managed to run, he would wind up dead pretty quickly. It was a little cruel, but it was the only thing they could come with in the moment. Mash and Jill went searching for Daniel. Jill teleported to the lower part of the sect, while Mash started with the tower itself. She could teleport in and out of buildings, and he could search the building with his domain. He did leave imitations of Priscilla with the others so that they could send signals to one another. Mash decided not to care about the tower anymore and decided the best path was right through the middle. He walked over to the center of the tower top. His domain didn't cover everything, but he would have an idea of what was in the room. That was all he was going for. His footsteps were loud on the stone, and he aimed carefully. He didn't bother being gentle about it and just stomped against the tower top until it broke. The first strike made some cracks and the second caused those cracks to branch out. The third stomp was enough to break the stone into pieces. He almost used too much force but managed to accomplish his goal. The ceiling broke and he dropped onto the floor below. The stones scattered as they struck the ground. He realized that this might not be the best plan. The stones might hurt whomever they land on. It probably wouldn't hurt Daniel. Probably. Just use the stairs. It will only take a few more seconds. Mash ran down the stairs and across each of the hallways. Other than the top 2 floors of the tower, each subsequent floor had many rooms in it. Mash noticed with little surprise that they were empty. What was more concerning was the lack of bodies. He hadn't seen any bodies since entering the sect and couldn't help but think of how Daniel had processed the monster corpses into pills. He gagged at the thought of eating another human being. He focused on literally anything else and started sprinting through the floors.